they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Salam alaikum, alaikum wassalami. Salam alaikum, say na peace that we want. But no be Muslim, is not a Christian. And we're here for Bible, make we kill ourselves. Salam alaikum, alaikum wassalami. Salam alaikum, say na peace that we want. But no be Christian, is not a Muslim. And we're here for Torah, make we bomb ourselves. They come from Shah, they want on with terrorists. Come from Niger, they want on with terrorists. Every day by day, them are bombing our schools, killing our youth. Say we know they happy. So they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is crazy, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is crazy, yo, they keep person. So they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is crazy, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is crazy, yo, they keep person. Prophet Muhammad is the road to Allah. Prophet Muhammad no they give for Allah. In the preach peace to the unbelievers. Change your ways and turn to Allah. Prophet Muhammad is the road to Allah. Prophet Muhammad no they give for Allah. In the preach peace to the unbelievers. They can change our ways and turn to Allah. The wages of sin, say my brother not dead. Wages of sin, say my sister not dead. Repent and have eternal life. Make you feel back our guests. Now we know they happy. Know they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Know they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Know they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Know they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Know they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Know they use Allah to body keep people. Allah is great, yo, they keep person. Go around them, they keep people.
Thank you so much for joining in. My name is Temitope Olodo. I'm a preventive terrorist consultant, author, and president of African Security Forum. And today we're going to have a great day, going to have a great discussion. And I have with me nobody else than the great Professor David Otto. Thank you so much for joining me, sir. Thank you, because I know you have a very, very busy schedule. For many that do not know what you do, it would be a great opportunity for you to tell them what you do, sir. In 1 minute, please tell our people at home, greet them and tell them what you do, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Temitope, and I want to appreciate your endeavors in terms of having this organized, but also to thank your listeners and your viewers. My name is David Otto. I am a security consultant, and I do consult for several states, including Nigeria. I also do a lot of work for other international organizations. I've done work for Interpol, the NATO forces, for the UK government, and several other entities, the US AFRICOM, the African Union. So I'm pleased to be here, Mr. Oludu, and to deal with the various security situations that are in Africa, for us to have some discussions, but particularly in Nigeria, which is the giant of the continent. So let's discuss these issues. And just to also mention that I am also a visiting professor at the University of Science and Technology, but within the counterterrorism department in China. So thank you for having me, Mr. Olodu. And
thank you so much, sir. And it's a great honor. And the reason why you are quite critical to this conversation is because there are very few individuals that God have blessed with the opportunity of traveling around the world to speak at conferences, to speak on TV on a variety of issues. And when the Nigerian government, now, let me correct myself, when the House of Representatives in Nigeria decided to host a security summit, or said they wanted to host a security summit, that was far back in March of 2021. I was quite excited because they said they were going to bring together security stakeholders to more or less drive the discussion on how to resolve some of the challenges in Nigeria. And then they had their conference. I started calling around. I said, oh, were you invited to speak at the conference? No. Were you invited? And I was like, who were the people that attended that conference? Who were the people that actually gave them, information? Because most of the discussions that we're having right now, some of these issues, you've met with a lot of chief of staff, old and new. You've told them a lot of things. And when I saw what they said they have come up with, I was disappointed. My spirit was down and the reason why I brought you on is because for my viewers who might not know, we've been talking about security issues or security concerns about terrorism even before Nigeria had the problem with Boko Haram.
That's correct.
Because people need to understand that before Boko Haram became the monster that it is now, we have been talking about it, myself and you. We'll be talking about you. You've been to NATO. You've spoken to people at the highest level. Because if you have spoken to NATO and lecture NATO, people in NATO, then talking at Nigerian House of Representatives is not a big deal. It's not. You've spoken at the House of Commons in the UK here. You've spoken at big schools, small schools, Malaysia, all these countries. And that's the reason why I said, let me bring you on board. In case maybe I am a bit naive and maybe my understanding is a bit old. Maybe I'm old school. At least if people could hear from people like you that are still trending, maybe they will believe me that some of the things that we're hearing is just ridiculous. And I let me at that point pause, and because I'm a man of the book, of the book, and there's a scripture in the Bible that normally attracts me, and this was when Paul or Saul, when he was challenged, and he said, "Of the Pharisees of Pharisees I am, of the Jews of Jews I am." In other words, he was trying to say, I have the skills and qualification to speak on this subject matter, have the skill set to speak on this subject matter. So that our people will know that I'm not just brought a villager to come and talk about security. Please, in 1 minute or two, just more or less talk about some of the things that you have done and you are doing in the area of this counter-terrorism and what you have done, how you've spoken at Al Jazeera, and all, because so that our people will know, so that when we dive into this thing, I will start saying this is where they're wrong, because we're talking about critical analysis of this security summit that they've had. So that when we start talking about it, people will not say, oh, these people have come again, they're just talking. Because if we are respected by, because our listeners who are listening to us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter right now, majority of them are people of the diaspora, and people there are people in the diaspora and people back home. You understand? But we have had the privilege of speaking to our contemporaries here in the UK, people that work in this field. No, our white colleagues, we've lectured them on this issue and they listen to us. So when we see our own people who are not who are using 12th century approach to address a 21st century challenge, we get a bit concerned that things are changing, threat is evolving, and yet we are still not moving in line with the new trends of challenge. That's why Boko Haram can continue to flex muscle. That's why Boko Haram can enter into super camps. Have you ever heard of Al Qaeda entering into a UK base or an American base and leave that place with their with their weapons? It's never happened. Only in Nigeria it happens, and the chief of staff is still there, and they are still running around as if nothing have happened. So I just wanted you to speak
Yeah.
truth to power on this, so that when we start talking, they will know, okay, these guys, they know their audience, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Take it away.
You're very correct, Mr. Olodu. And again, I think it's important to contextualize, the background of what we do. As you rightly said, we know what we're talking about. We've been in this area for years now. Specifically, myself, as you may know from my background, I do represent a number of organizations. I am the African and European representative for the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board, which is based in the US. And essentially what we do is to train people that want to become certified anti-terrorism specialists. So I am one of the key trainers, but also one of the program designers for the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board. And that makes me a certified master anti-terrorism specialist. So I have that specialization. In terms of what one has done, because we're working within a very sensitive environment, and that is why it was important for me to just mention, in passing, some of the countries and some of the institutions that we've worked for and that we continuously consult for. More importantly, I think our reach is not just local. We have gone global, and I think as Africans and as professionals in the field, we are able to give the best to the nation. And insecurity anywhere is insecurity everywhere. So for individuals like us, we believe that whether be it Europe or America or Asian countries, we give our best. That is why, specifically in 2016, I was one of the 5 experts that was called to design the Interpol Global Counterterrorism Strategy, and we did that successfully, and that strategy is being used in most of the countries now. But what we continuously see is the lack of an implementation framework, and we'll come to that when we talk in details about this report that was produced by the National Assembly Security Committee. So without doubt, Mr. Olodu, I think it's important for our listeners and our viewers to understand that we are there because we want to see security, we want to see peace in the continent, and we want to make sure that we represent the continent in such a way that all the economic, social, and political issues will align together with the successful effectiveness in security. Because without that, there is no doubt, if you don't have an effective security in your country, if you don't have your national strategy in terms of how you deal with your threats, if you don't have control of your internal and external enemies, if you don't have control of your internal and external borders, you don't have control of your citizens within and your citizens out of your country, then you would be on the back foot always. So yes, Mr. Olodu, I think it's important for us to dive straight into these issues, having talked about some of the areas that, of course, you and I have also worked on. On several occasions, we've talked about this. So this is something which I think is very much in our terrain and very much in our hearts. And as the president of the African Security Forum, we've seen that platform developed, to a very large extent, and focuses a lot on African security issues, and this is one of the children of that forum. Of course, you bringing us on this platform to talk about these issues is quite key. So it's not just Nigeria that is the issue. We've got so many issues happening all over Africa, and but let's talk about Nigeria today. Over to you, Mr. Olodu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I'm grateful to you, sir, and for your great work that you are doing. And just like you said, we started all this African Security Platform Forum, and it's grown with colleagues all over in Kenya, Mozambique, Nigeria, South Africa, all on that platform, doing great work in their respective country, all calling on you, calling on other colleagues, and somebody doesn't just become a master certified practitioner because he's read 2 or 3 books, because they know their onions, they know what they are talking about. And that's why I brought him on board, so that he can speak truth to power when it comes to Nigeria. These are guys that have risked their life to go to Bornu to speak there. We're not talking of 2 years ago, we're talking of 3, 4 years ago, before this thing went bad. And yet, you guys sit down there and talk all kind of things, and yet you are not putting things in order. So let's dive into it. Let's kill this thing. Let's kill this thing. So now, yourself and me, we've worked on the corridors of power in the UK. We've had the privilege of going to committee meetings here in the UK, in the House of Commons. We know the whole security meetings. So nobody can baffle us. Nobody can do magic for us. Nobody can say, we're organizing 50 members of parliament to come and talk about issues. And then when they came up, they said they have 9 bills. So I'm going to mention 3 or 4 of the 9 bills. So it is not possible for you to have an event, as they said, on the 29th of May, you finish your event, 2 days event. They said they had a 2 days event. So I want to kill this. So they started on the 26th of May, and they finished on the 29th of May, which is the 4 days, as they call it, 4-day summit of security consultants. All the security consultants that I know of, who are always on TV, I've not heard of any of them that said they were there, but they have obas there. That's kings. They have their king. They have the head of units, head of our police, our army. They have them there, who have been doing all the strategy they know how to do, and yet they've not been able to solve any problem. They were there too, to contribute what they are doing now to it. See, you can't put new wine in old sack. It will destroy. So but that's not for me to say. So they had that, and they said they now had 9 bills that they raised out of it. So it's either they wrote that bill within 3 days, which is impossible, or they had those bills already and they just presented it. One of it is the Civil Defense Bill, the Police Act Bill, the ECOWAS Light Weapons Bill, EFCC Bill. This is irritating, because when we are talking of innovative approaches to dealing with security, as we speak, just today or yesterday, there were discussions by MI5 and MI6, and they're talking of young people that are getting involved in violence extremism. Because all the people that are getting involved in violence extremism in Nigeria are people below the age of 50. And all these people that are gathering themselves to have a discussion are people from 50 and above. So I did not hear anything about bringing people from the NSAS to be involved. I did not hear anything about bringing people in the diaspora into that discussion. I did not hear anything about saying, let's have, like we have in the UK, which is happening now, where you have video conferencing into it, so that people like yourself can give a presentation of papers on evolving threat and how to mitigate against it. Nothing like that. They just brought themselves together as usual. They played their drums and all the people followed them. And then they said they had a discussion and they had 9 bills and 19 recommendations. One of it is that they will now have they want technology to be embedded. They want technology, they want drones to be used. Yet, sir, out of these 9 bills they're talking about, I did not see anything in those bills about application of the use of drones, because the Niger State governor said that he has bought drone, but he doesn't. He's still sitting in the warehouse in Lagos because they will not even allow him to bring it out. Remember, he doesn't.
Yeah.
He's not buying the drones for himself. He's buying the drones to give to the military and the police. Yet the Nigerian law does not even allow him to hand it over to them. He's not taking it away. He's giving it to the police. Yet they can't use it. There's nothing like any. I have it all written down. Nothing like drones. Nothing like sharing intelligence, improving Nigeria, because we know that the problem with Nigeria is the sharing of intelligence. So please speak to that. And you're based on what I just said, 9 bills, all of them is just police acts. I don't know what the police, you've improved police, you're just improving it, there's no change, there's no community policing. If they said community policing act, I would have said, oh, something new.
Yeah.
They're just tweaking it. So I don't know what they've got to say, what you got to say to that.
I think you're correct, Mr. Oludo. I think let's dive into this.
Yes.
There has been an outcome. That outcome has been, from what you're talking about, has been a 146 page report.
Yeah.
That was provided by the National Assembly Security Summit Committee. Now, that is a federal government report, which has been handed over to, of course, the president and the vice president, perhaps. And that report, as you rightly said, was produced by the National Security Summit Committee.
Yeah.
Now, there has been a number of recommendations, which you rightly said, and a number of bills that have come out from that, which is the outcome. So the question is, how did they arrive at that? Now, there are two things here. You've mentioned one of them. One of them is the official event, the event which was held a couple of days, and in that event, it is being said that the event was the event where those recommendations and those bills were produced from.
Yeah.
Now, it's difficult to understand that part of it because it's not entirely the case. Now, the reason why that is so is because the National Assembly had also given out what you call for papers.
Yeah.
Now, this call for papers was exclusively given to citizens and experts, different organizations. So they called for recommendations from all these different stakeholders. And I think that was done on the 17th of March.
Yeah, I have. I received.
So,
I received the paper. One of those adverts that went out. Some people sent it to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened is there are a number of individuals and a number of organizations that compiled some very comprehensive recommendations.
Yeah.
And those recommendations were given directly to the House of Representatives
via email. Yeah.
Yes, they were given via email. One of the issues which I know for sure, because I did organize a number of experts that were interested in putting forward some recommendations. The House of the Security Committee, National Assembly Security Committee, received those documentations. They received those recommendations, but they did not acknowledge those recommendations.
Yeah.
And because they didn't acknowledge the recommendations for the people that I know, I also know that they didn't acknowledge the recommendations for the people that I don't know.
Yeah.
So what has come out from these 146 pages is a combination of these recommendations that were made before the event, which you're mentioning. Most of the recommendations came from those experts that produced those recommendations who were mentioned in passing in the entire report, but not, their recommendations were not acknowledged.
Yeah.
So the people who sent the recommendations didn't receive any email to say, thank you
so
for
much.
the recommendations that you sent. They didn't receive any of those. Now, what has happened now is when you read through the recommendations that have been given to the president, you then realize that most of these recommendations came from
cut and paste.
Yes, from some of these experts. Now, there is no problem with that. As long as you acknowledge to the people who send these recommendations and say, thank you for your recommendations that you sent. We asked for this. You responded as Nigerian citizens. We acknowledge the fact that Nigerians are contributing to national security, because the whole point of having this 146-page recommendation is to find out from the people of Nigeria what solutions they think will be best in addressing the issues that they are facing. So this was supposed to be a very frank discussion. Now, the recommendations came looking at all the 6 geopolitical zones. As you know, the Northeast, they were focusing more on the issues of Boko Haram and how the Nigerian army, the Nigerian security forces were tackling the issues, what kind of areas that needed amendments, what areas needed improvements. Then they went towards so they did what you call an identification of all the threats within the 6 geopolitical zones. But of course, that is added to the FCT. So they looked at the Boko Haram in specific in the Northeast. They looked at the Northwest, where they talked about kidnapping, banditry. They looked at North Central, where they talked about the headsmen and the communal clashes. They looked at the South, where they focused on the Niger Delta militias, within the waterways. They looked at the Southwest, which is Lagos, of course. They talked about banditry and kidnapping within those areas as threats. The Southeast, they looked at secession, kidnapping, and then what we all call the unknown gunmen, which of course is within that area. So generally, what the recommendations was a profile of all the serious organized crimes and also the terrorist activities, but also the secessionist movements that are going on out through the country. And they took all those areas and then divided it into thematic areas. So they used, I think, about 4 or 5 thematic areas. Now, within those 4 or 5 thematic areas, I think they mentioned local community and security level engagement. So how do you engage local communities? People provided recommendations on how to engage local communities, the role of traditional institutions, and people gave examples. Then the second area that they focused on was looking at the strategic kinetic national security area, which is the use of the military and the use of the police in tackling insecurity. What needs to be changed? What developments need to be made? Then they look at global perspective, which in my opinion was really not well looked at, because within the global perspective, I think what a lot of African countries fail to understand is that most of the problems within the country have pressure that are coming out from other areas out of the country. So I think they need to do more there, but we'll talk about that when we get to that. So I'm just trying to list the areas where they were focused on. So they looked at the area of the global perspective on insecurity. Then they looked at non-kinetic. So which are some of the soft approaches that you can use, without necessarily involving the military, without involving the police. So things like negotiation, mediation. So do we mediate with Boko Haram? Do we negotiate with the Niger Delta militias? Do we, have a dialogue with IPOB? Do we talk to the bandits in the Northwest? Do we, talk to kidnappers in the North Central? So they looked at all those options. And then I think they also looked at how to effectively bring on board the DDRR program, which is the disengagement or disarmament, demobilization, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Now, in all those areas that they looked at, Mr. Olodu, I think that report that has been produced, the 146 pages report, is based on the recommendations made towards each and every one of those areas that I've mentioned. So the point that is got to be made is that implementation is the son of ideas. So recommendations are ideas. What is it that we can do? These are ideas. Now, what this report doesn't really illustrate much is what you call the implementation framework, because there has always been responses. Nigeria has got the NAC test, which is a Nigeria national counterterrorism strategy. Yeah. Now, what is working within that strategy and what hasn't worked? What needs to be improved? Now, if you have all these recommendations, put together, what you need more, rather than just recommendations, is what you call an implementation framework. Which, if you look at the report, if you read that report entirely, you realize that the implementation framework is not there. So
Yeah.
they say to you that, okay, we would initiate a for example, as a non-kinetic strategy, we would make use of vigilante groups, for example. Now, what they don't say in the report is, first of all, what has been done in dealing with vigilante groups. So, for example, the Civilian Joint Task Force, or the Amotekun, or other vigilante groups that exist within the 6 geopolitical zones, in the North Central, in the Northeast, in the South. So, I think what needs to be done is that the House of Representatives needs to understand that Nigeria is a huge country, and because the country is so big, it's so difficult for you to develop one framework that exists for the 6 geopolitical zones. Now, what needs to be done is a proper mapping of each and every one of those 6 geopolitical zones, as they've done. But what they haven't done is let me tell you what they've done first before what they haven't done. What they've done is to give some kind of a rapid assessment of what is happening in the Northeast and what should be done there, but not really a detailed assessment. If you're providing a document to the president, which entails some kind of an implementation, you've got to be very, very specific and go down to details. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is because some of the recommendations that were made by some of the members of the public, some experts that made these recommendations, they clearly stated in those recommendations that you need to come back to us in order for you to get the implementation framework. Because you did ask for the implementation framework, so we can't give it to you. So in order for you to give this document to anyone, be it the president or the vice president, you need to be able to show them that, okay, these are the recommendations, and this is what you need to do in terms of implementing those recommendations. So, it's very, very clear how this can be done. Let me leave you speak a bit, Mr. Olubi.
You've really killed it, and I'm so pleased that we're having this conversation because, like you rightly said, let's pick it from, because once the foundation is not right, everything falls apart. I'll use my experience from the UK and other security agencies and legislative approaches. In the UK, there will be a call for written and oral submission. And when you make a submission, they will acknowledge that submission, and if they like what you've done, they would literally say, Mr. David Otto, there's going to be a committee meeting or an event, and we want you to come and present this paper where we could ask you other questions. So when I was sent the adverts that everybody got, they sent it across to everybody as usual, which is the Nigerian way of doing things. Get your ideas and then use it, and don't acknowledge you. The first thing I did was to send an email. I set up a group, and I sent an email, and I said to the name that was highlighted there, please, can you inform me if there's going to be an oral presentation or whatever? You have 7 days to come back to me. And I did not get a response. And at that point, I made up my mind, no, I'm not wasting my time for these people. I'm not going to sit down and write a report with experts, which will just be dumped in the bin. And I feel so relieved that I did not waste my time to put together documentations or ideas on use people, bring people of about 100 years experience together to put information together. So if you put your 30 years experience with your colleagues in the office, which is another 120 years, and you join your friends in Bonu and join your friends in in NATO, and we bring all those experience. We're talking of almost 200, 300 years of experience, and you give it to an irresponsible group of individuals who will just pick it and dump it somewhere. It's a waste of your space. And the Bible says when you take your knowledge to a place and it's not accepted, you should just take the dust off your feet. And I just literally did that. I just said, you know what? I'm not wasting my time with these people, and I decided not to send any document to them. Because what should have happened is, number one, you acknowledge receipt of a document or any information. There should be an auto response that says, thank you very much. If you send us a document, this is what the next procedure is. When I then heard that there was going to be a summit, I then sent an email again to the clerk, the assistant clerk. I'm mentioning it now, to the assistant clerk by WhatsApp, and he read it. And I said, with this summit that you're holding, have a diaspora representation, because there's 17.5 million Nigerians in the diaspora, including people like Mr. Femi TDS, who have been going to Nigeria continuously and providing training to the police on technology, use of technology, the use of body cams and all those things, without collecting a penny. And these are people that you could invite to even give you a demonstration of what they're doing, and yet no response. And that was when I knew this was a waste of space. Now, you've said a lot of things about what could have happened. Now, you've been involved in the UK, de-radicalization project, and there's a lot of law that enables the prevent strategy, they enable the pursue strategy, they enable the preparatory strategy. Now, what I was expecting, for example, that when they were coming out and saying the legislators were going to have this security conversation, was that it would be driven from a security perspective.
I'm not putting off my camera. I just want to get my charger, so I'm putting it.
Oh, okay, that's
so
okay.
I can charge it up so it doesn't go off. This
okay,
is a very
that's okay.
important conversation.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr.
Excellent.
Abdul. Yes, go ahead.
Excellent.
I'm listening.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So that when we have this conversation, when they have this conversation, they are looking at it from a legislative perspective. So you have people like Mr. Femi, who is watching us right now, who has been to Nigeria, who has used body cameras and things. If, for example, they came out with legislative provisions that say this is how to regulate, or regulatory policy on the use of electronic, or regulatory policy on the use of technology to aid the insurgency fight on insurgency, then I would have been happy. Then I'll know that at least there is a way. If they come up to say, okay, how private security could be involved in terrorism management, how private companies, as we speak, private security companies cannot be used in security management in Nigeria, apart from machineries that could be brought in based on presidential degrees or whatever they want to do, executive orders. But private security cannot be used. They can be used in close protection. They can be used in any way. And even with the security summit held, there was no discussion about legislative provisions on how to use private security in Nigeria. There's nothing about technology. They said, oh, the government should use technology. And yet, these people gather themselves, who are legislators, who should know better, gather themselves, and they know that even drones are not permitted on Nigerian soil. You can't use drones because there's no law that allows you to use drones on Nigerian soil. You see, so these are the kind of discussions. As we speak today, as a private security consultant, there are laws in the UK that allows you to record information and to be able to use that information that you've recorded to be able to do research work, to go on the internet, to listen into Al-Qaeda discussion, record it, and do everything, and you can share your information with nothing like that in Nigerian law that allows you to do that. If you go to Nigeria and you start discussing with Boko Haram, they could pick you up and say you are supplying products to them. Meanwhile, you are doing underground There's nothing along that line. So when they say they should use technology, and they're not coming up with technology, with information, they're not looking at what the UK have done, what Europe have done, what America have done to try, what kind of laws they brought in. You know, what is causing the problem between farmer headers? What is causing all these clashes? Is it not because there's problem with cattle roots? There's problem with compensation? Why is it that they did not come up with farmer headers bill, resolution bill, to say this is how issues will be resolved? This is a special court for farmer headers, mobile court, that when somebody is caught doing this, this is how do you know that if you create such a court, that alone can resolve 90% of part of the problem that we have? And yet these jokers say they gather themselves together to have a conversation, and yet they're saying they're coming up with 9 bills, and none of those bills have a technology bill, none of those bills have a de-radicalization bill, because you and me could easily have gone to Nigeria to set up a de-radicalization project, just like our good friend had in Walthamstow. My friend in Birmingham, they had programs like that. They prevent programs.
That's
where they
Hanif,
can take
Hanif
projects.
Kadi.
Yeah, Kadi, Alif. You know, these are people that I worked with who had projects, and I was paying them. We had a pot. I was paying them to de-radicalize youths. And there are so many youths now that are getting involved in separatist agenda with violence extremism as the endpoint. They're not just talking. They're not just talking for the sake of talking, which is the point that I'm talking about, evolving threats.
Yes.
Nothing along that line. Please speak to that truth.
You're correct, Mr. Olodo. I think what is important for listeners and viewers to understand is that in the 21st century, when you're faced with multiple threats like the ones that is being faced in Nigeria, but not just Nigeria, but let's stick to Nigeria now, but entire Africa. I think there has to be a very clear understanding that all solutions have to be intelligence-led, and intelligence-led simply means that you need information, and you need to bring the people on your side, because in today's horizontal warfare, the military cannot succeed, cannot survive, cannot sustain any effective strategy if they are not in line with the local communities that they're trying to protect. So I think it's very important for any entity, whether it be the National Assembly, whether it be the security infrastructure, the security services, to understand that you need to have the hearts and minds of the people on your side, whether they are in Nigeria or they are out of Nigeria, they are in the diaspora. These are the people that form the greatest threat. And they are the same people that will form the greatest solution to any issue that you face in the country. Now, if you look at all the 6 geopolitical zones and, of course, the FCT, what you find out, behind all the threats are people. Behind all the threats, whether it's Boko Haram or it's kidnappers in the northwest, or so-called farmer heather crisis in the central, or secessionist movements in the south, or what they call now the Oduduwa Republic, protesters, who want their own separate state. It's all made up of people, and what does that mean? It means any output is as a result of what you put in. So you've got to be able to understand that people are in the middle of all this, and if you don't have a strategy in which you can engage with the people, both the people at home and both the people outside of the country, then you're already a step towards failure. And I think that's very key in terms of any strategy. So when the National Assembly puts out a call for the public to engage in proposing recommendations, and they then take those recommendations and do not acknowledge to the same public that they have received XYZ recommendations from them, they are undermining the same people they are trying to protect. And because you're undermining the people that you're trying to protect, you're therefore turning the people against you, because you are there as a representative of the people. And the people want to see that you're speaking their language, not your language. So I think it's very important to first of all take note of that. Now, you mentioned very powerfully the role of technology. We've always said that technology is important because it makes things a lot more easier. It is easy for a state to able to permutate certain threats and be one step ahead. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to a number of issues. So, for example, if you're talking about the use of drones or the use of other forms of technology to deal with threats, do you have the data that you require in order for you to make that technology work? Because technology doesn't work in a vacuum, especially when it comes to insurgency. It works because you have access to data. And if you have a state or a government or a country that does not have the required data, that doesn't know how to collect data, it doesn't know how to store its data, it then becomes very difficult for you to feed your hardware, which people call technology, with your software, which is your data that you've collected. So I think the most important thing when it comes to technology is what you call garbage in, garbage out. What you put in is what you get out. So even if you bring in technology, you still need data. And where do you get data from? You get data from people. It's information. You gather information from people. People give you information. But when you don't have what you call a citizens-government relationship, the social contract is very weak. The people don't trust the state. The people are very skeptical about what the state is doing. The people do not see themselves as involved. They are not being consulted. Then evidently, people will not give you the information that you need. They won't give you the information on time. They won't give you the right information, or they won't give you the information at all. So I think it's very important to understand that relationship is very key. Now, if you've got technology, do you have the infrastructure? Technology doesn't work in an area where there are no infrastructures. So when you look at all the 6 geopolitical zones, and if you look at the areas where these terrorists or criminals or insurgents or secessionists or separatists or kidnappers or bandits or non-gunmen, when you look at the areas where they operate, do you see technology being effective in those areas? So if technology is not effective, how do you design your own human intelligence, what you call human, in order for that human to feed into your technology? You've got to understand that. Now, again, it comes down to creating awareness, within the local population, letting the people know the importance. Let them know that the people are like water, as they say, and the military is like the fish. Without water, without the people, the military, the security services, the police will not survive. They will suffocate. So you've got to create that awareness, not just within the population, but let your security forces know that their engagement with the local population is very important in order for it to make a difference to what kind of information they receive and the effectiveness of their technology that they're using. So that's very important. So the people-centric approach is what I think the government needs. So when you have a National Assembly that puts out a very credible information calling for citizens of Nigeria to contribute, to recommend on areas of local community engagement, on areas of kinetic strategy, how the military is doing, to recommend on areas of non-kinetic strategy, and then they do so, and then you do not recognize them, you don't recognize the efforts that they do, what you're doing is you are now taking away the people and you're putting forward the very few that are at the top of the government. So it comes back to that friction, Mr. Oludu, which is being created. So I think what needs to be done in looking at all the various insecurity areas that we've mentioned within Nigeria, of course, an alphabet, I think what needs to be done is governments need to make more effort to win the hearts and minds of the people. Now, the reason being is because without the people, there is not going to be insecurity. Insecurity exists because of people. And insecurity can only be terminated, can only stop if the people make an informed decision, if the people feel that they are being listened to, the people feel that some of their grievances are being listened to and they are being dealt with by the state. Now, if you continuously do things and carry out activities and take steps that delineate the people away from the state, then what you're doing is you're creating more enemies than friends. So I think these are some of the areas which, from a strategic point of view, the government really needs to understand. They need to get their strategic communication right. The state behavior needs to change so that the people can begin to be at the front of this solution. Now, I think my last thought on that is that simply because the government thinks they're in front doesn't necessarily mean they're leading. The people who lead the country is the people. But because the government thinks they're in front, they shouldn't think that they are the ones that are leading the country. Let the people make decisions. Let the people feel that they are involved in some of these issues. Over to you, Mr. Ododu.
You have more or less, hit it. If you're watching us right now, please like this page, share this page, tell your friends that we're live, and let us know where you are watching from. At this point, let me bring you back. Let me bring it back. One of the controversies that have trailed this conversation today is the fact that Mr. President said, or maybe the aide of Mr. President said, this is so innovative, this security summit that was held is so innovative. The report that was given is the first of its kind. And the former Senate president, came out to say, no, that's not right. You people might be suffering from dementia, but let me remind you that between 18th and 12th of February 2018, there was a 2-day summit that the current vice president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, was the guest speaker at the event, and they gathered recommendation and it was transmitted to the president. So don't tell us if that was done in 2018 and nothing from that discussion or that conversation that the vice president attended had materialized or been used to date. Let's not even talk about them. Temitope Olodo, led a group to meet with His Excellency, the President, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And a document produced by African Security Forum, let me make it clear. When I say produced by African Security Forum, I'm talking of members of African Security Forum, including yourself. All the recommendation that you gave, under each person's recommendation, I put the name of the person's details, and title, and I gave it to Mr. President. And when I met with him, Mr. President was meeting with a lot of people, and he was giving them 10 to 15 minutes. He gave me and the colleague, who I won't want to mention his name for security reasons, because he works in a very sensitive position within the field of counterterrorism. He met with us, some other individuals, and he gave us 45 to 1 hour, and we spoke intensively on security. And at that point, I gave him the document, which is the famous picture of me and Mr. President, where I was handing him a booklet, not one sheet of paper. That was in 2015. I'm talking of 6 years ago. Exactly 6 years and 2 months. Roughly, I gave him that, or more than 2 months. I gave him that document, which included what Mr. David Otto had written, which included what Professor and all the other individuals have written. variety of it, Chidi, all of them wrote things. These are people that have been on a tour to Afghanistan. We're talking of fighting Boko Haram. These are people that fought Al Qaeda, that had, you know, that fought Al Qaeda, that fought in Iraq. Those are Nigerians, people that are taking footprint of criminals and turning it into forensics. In the UK here, police officers, we put that document together, and up to today, nothing have come out of it. So if nothing have come out of the document, I, a nobody, from the Nigerian perspective, produced in 2015, and the Senate president in 2018 put together, do you have any hope that what have been put together today might see the day of light within the next 2 years of this presidency?
That's a very good question, and I think you've reflected on some of the main concerns that most people have, especially when it comes to these events, which sometimes takes all the credit of the day, but in real effect, you don't see any outcome, and some people describe it as talking workshops. So people come and talk, and then at the end of the day, nothing happens after that. So I think there's always there always has to be a very clear understanding, Mr. Olodu, as you rightly said. Are these recommendations new? Nigeria has been fighting, engaging with Boko Haram for years now. I mean, some people say since 2009, but that's not true. I mean, 2009 was when the group really went violent, to a much higher extent. But it's been there since 2001. The same time when we had the September 9/11 same time framework. So that is almost 20 years, which we've been having insurgency threats in the country. Not to talk of other threats around the 6 geopolitical zones. So recommendations have always been put forward. People have always come up with ideas as to how to deal with these issues. And as I said, recommendations are never enough. They could have been repeated, in this case in 2015, which you rightly said, there were so many recommendations that were made at the time when the president was quite new in government. That was his first year in office. He promised to deal with the insurgency within months. But of course, that was some kind of a misunderstanding of the nature of the insurgency, which of course has been accepted from there on. So 6 years into that, we're still back on the same issues of recommendation. Yes, there's been these discussions from the former Senate President Bukari Saraki, who said, we've had this kind of event before. We've had these recommendations before. So it's not a new thing. Now, why is it not a new thing? It's because recommendations are simply recommendations. If you don't have an implementation framework, then it's not going to work. Now, even if you have an implementation framework, you still need the state to give its political will. The government has to be able to give a go-ahead for these recommendations to go towards the implementation phase. And in order for that to happen, you've got to have an assessment as to whether there are available resources to, have these implementations, done. Does the state have the resources? What is the priority? What are the short-term recommendations that need to be done? Which states do you want to prioritize your implementation? What is the medium-term plan? What is your long-term plan? So even when you have a huge Bible of recommendations being written by various experts, you still have to draw up a comprehensive implementation plan. And that plan has to be very specific in terms of what it requires in resources, what it requires in human resources, in material resources, what it requires in time frame, What are some of the challenges? So it still requires a number of intervention for it to be able to have any kind of success. So even the technical ability to implement some of these issues is not something that is done without capacity building. So my take is that, Mr. Olodu, there has been, as you rightly said, a number of recommendations that have been made. People have talked about what the government is doing wrong. They've talked about how these things can be implemented. But there's a combination, as I said to you, there's a combination of an implementation framework that hasn't been done. And it hasn't been done simply because maybe the government doesn't have the money to do it. Maybe there's no political will to do it. Maybe the people who are supposed to do it do not have the expertise to have these things implemented. Maybe they've tried it and it didn't work because they didn't do it properly. So there has to be what you call an assessment as to why did the recommendation of 2018, which the Senate president is saying that they provided, what happened to it? Now he can say that yes, we provided this recommendation, but he didn't say what happened to that recommendation. And as the Senate president, what one would expect is for him to come up and say, okay, we did the same recommendation in 2018 and we handed it to the president, but nothing came out of it. It was thrown in the bin, or we didn't have the resources to implement it. Because as a Senate president, you have the power at the time when he was in office to inquire to the president and say, Mr. President, we provided you with these recommendations, X, Y, Z. We haven't seen any implementation. We haven't seen you giving your political will for it to go forward. So I think it's very important to do that. Now, if you don't do that as a Senate president, then who else is going to do it? Because you've got the access to power, you've got the the understanding of what needs to be done. So the point I'm trying to make here, Mr. Olodu, is that the government really needs to move beyond writing recommendations. But of course, you can't implement without recommendations. So recommendation is just the first phase. And the hope is that when it comes to making sure that these recommendations are implemented, there's going to be a separate framework. There's going to be discussions regarding how it is going to be done. Now, one thing which I did note about the 146 pages of the report which the Senate, which the NAS, which is the National Security Summit report, which they presented to the president, is that they made a lot of comparison to various countries that have gone through similar issues. Of course, they talked about places like Afghanistan, and to understand the kinetic strategy that was used in Afghanistan, or understanding how the United States negotiated with the Taliban. Now, I think the government has to be really careful and tries to implement some of these recommendations or some of these comparative recommendations that have been made. Because the Taliban, for example, was a government before it was overthrown by the United States coalition in 2001.
Exactly.
Even though it was accused of shielding Al-Qaeda, it was a government of its own. So, Somalia, for example, is dealing with something else. South Sudan with something else. The Gambia. So I think, the point I have to make is that, without giving too much, is that the government has to be very careful how it compares the implementation plans that have been cited in this particular report. They have to be really careful about that. Over to you, Mr. Olodu.
You said they have to be very careful. You are talking of a house that, how many, can you go to the Nigeria House of Assembly website and found reports that have been prepared by researchers that is looking at all the different, if we Google counterterrorism strategy or counterterrorism statistics, researchers, House of Commons have a library, UK House of Commons. You could get a lot of research work. They send out a lot of FOIs to all the different sections to get information, to get the data, and the researchers write the report, which is there in the library of the House of Commons, so that when members are talking, they talk intelligently. You know, I'm not saying that Nigerian legislators are not getting information, but what I'm saying is that they are not well informed. With all
Yeah.
due respect, the Nigerian police does not even have a research unit, for God's sake. So who are they to tell us? The Nigerian army just created a university. I don't think they had a research unit. Yet they have a lot of people, and I know a lot of them, that have actually traveled to Santos and others to do a PhD in terrorism issues, which they could easily implement. But they've not done, they've not implemented any of that. So it's a big problem. Now, I wanted to ask you 2 or 3 questions before we
Yes.
move, because I noticed that we have a lot of people watching us from Gambia. We have people watching us from America. I can see some people watching us from Dubai. So thank you so much. People are watching us across the different platforms. They're watching us on Facebook. They're watching us on LinkedIn, and they're watching us on YouTube. So if you're watching us right now, please like this page, share this page. Tell us where you're watching us from, so that we could acknowledge you. I acknowledge those that are watching us from Gambia, those that are watching us from Lagos. So thank you so much. I could see there are 4 professors right now that are watching us, and that is good, because if professors are listening to us, it shows that we've got something to offer. Based on your knowledge of Africa and the security challenges going, and we need to expand it a bit. Do you think that one of the ways in which we could deal with the growth in violence extremism is to allow certified security experts like yourself and people with security company in Nigeria to have at least limited access to weapons, so that they could complement the work that the military or our security services are doing in dealing with violent extremism in Africa and in Nigeria?
I think that's a very popular question. People think that, and people believe that, the best way to deal with a threat is to be able to create a deterrent by, maybe possessing some level of weaponry yourself. Of course, nobody goes to a fight to lose. If you know that somebody is armed, which is the American style, arm yourself, I arm myself, and we both respect each other. Sometimes these debates and these recommendations can be very difficult to balance. But from an African perspective, I think we don't need more arms in order to limit the level of insecurity that is happening in the continent. The issues that African countries have now is the overflow of small and light weapons. Of course, there are people that can obtain licenses to have weapons, and they have to pass certain criteria in order for them to have that. Now, once you begin to allow everyone to, become the wild west, and arm themselves, I think it then, becomes a very challenging circumstances. What I think Africa needs now is to be able to look at its own specific affairs, and look at the environment in which we are in. We are not in the state where we should be promoting self-defense through the owning of weapons. I think what we are in Africa now is in the stage where we have to be working towards removing those factors that promote people from joining armed groups, promote people from becoming involved in extremism. Once you've succeeded in doing that, and then you can see that you've leveraged between what people really need and what they want. So I think most people that join terrorist organizations, they do that because they need to do that. I mean, I'm not saying that there are people who join simply because they are poor, or simply because they have no other choice. There are people who deliberately do so. Rich people join these organizations, people that are well-to-do. But I think the majority of young people that are involved in terrorism, in extremism, they do so out of desperation. And what I think we should be focusing on is to endeavor to create an environment where people can have an alternative source of living. People can have better living standards. People can see themselves as not being, one of or the other of Wazobia. So I think it's important to, for me, my experience, especially in Africa, I wouldn't recommend promoting, people to be armed because of insecurity. Because what happens is you just create a scenario where everybody, becomes armed, and the issues that cause people to become armed are still not addressed.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't really promote that for now. Over to you, Mr. Oludu.
Okay, yes, okay. Let me take it a bit further and ask. I don't know of any other country around the world where 200 children are taken on motorcycle, and there's not one single police car to trace them. The police have helicopters. I know they have 2 helicopters. One of our brothers who is watching from Scotland said actually they do have Nigerian police do have a development and research department. So I have to correct myself and say, yes, they do have a development and research department. But if Nigerian police continue to give ordinary police station maybe 50,000 naira in 3 months to buy fuel, to pay for electricity, I don't know how much they will be putting or investing in that. And I've not seen them come up with anything, maybe body camera, stick, or even any equipment at all to show that they are actually coming up with research in that unit. So I hope they do have a research development center that is fit for purpose. But let's go back to these 200 children that are being kidnapped, 100 children being kidnapped, and the police response rate is completely zero. Nigerian police is one of the worst in the world, if not the worst in the world. I know if you were put in charge of Nigerian police today, the first thing you will try to do in the next 3 years to at least try and reduce your ranking on the worst, on the ranking of the police listing, to try and say, okay, we were 150, now we are 130. That's how it should work. But there is no movement to actually get the police to be respected or to police by consent. Do you think having a commissioner of police for school and having police officers that are trained to provide additional support to schools on how to keep them safe is the way forward to resolve this problem?
Yes, Mr. Oludu, I think it's important to make a point. As you rightly said, that of course the Nigerian police force, they have a research and development center. It's not just about having the center as a building. I think it's more about what comes out from it. So I think the argument is what is the effectiveness of the center rather than whether they have the center at all. Secondly, you mentioned about the huge amount of insecurity that has been happening in the northwest and north central, where we've seen, it started with Boko Haram kidnapping Chibok girls and 200 and something girls. Many people didn't believe that, it could actually happen. And all of a sudden, we've seen bandits who are doing a copycat, in the northwestern province, northwestern region, and they're kidnapping huge numbers of children. And sometimes it's just unbelievable that, the security services within the state, which of course is controlled by the federal government, has no power to stop this kind of kidnapping. And the truth is that when kidnapping becomes successful, then it becomes very difficult for people to give it up because, you know, nobody stops the business when it's thriving. So as long as kidnappers succeed in kidnapping people at large, they would always continue because it's like a business. If you're winning, you don't change the winning team. You have to continue doing what you're doing. So the government needs to let them fail, and you know, by letting them fail, it means you have to develop your preventive strategy, which you already talked about. You have to stop them from successfully carrying out this kidnapping. So if they fail, then they will have to do something else. It's the balloon effect of security. Now, whether there should be a special police unit to deal with this school security, innovation is one of the things that works in security. So you learn by your experiences, and if schools have become the most soft targets of bandits in a particular location or across the country, and if the state or the states or the federal government is unable to deal with this, I think the first thing for them to do is to create a special unit to address this issue while they are thinking about a long-term strategy. And if it means having a special Nigerian police to deal with protection of critical infrastructures, including schools, so be it. But that is not only the solution. Why are these bandits succeeding? Where are they getting the weapons from? And what is the location of choice that they carry out this mass kidnapping? Why that particular location? What is happening within that location that enables these bandits to succeed? Is it the ungovernable space? Is it the porous borders around that location? So you've got to really understand why they're succeeding in order for you to even decide to create a special unit to deal with that. And one would expect that if there is indeed a research and development center for the Nigerian police, then the question is, why haven't they come up with a solution to that? So I think what Nigeria needs is not a police force. I think they need a police service. They need a police that speaks the language of the people. I mean, the origin of the police, was not to be antagonistic towards the citizens, but for it to work alongside the population, to work alongside its community. And that is why a lot of people are calling for community policing. They are calling for state policing, because you can only police the people that you know. You can only police the communities that trust you. If you don't have trust within the communities, you don't know the communities are not comfortable, then you will not have the most vital of instrument that any police officer should have. And it is only two instruments: trust and information. Information is not going to come to you if there is no trust. And people are not going to trust you if you can't get information from them. So it's very simple. If the community knows that you don't know what is going on within the community, then they can't trust you to protect them because you don't know. So if you, a police officer, you are not getting information from the local community, it's because you don't earn their trust. And nothing goes within local communities without the knowledge of the community. Again, as I mentioned, as insecurity is a people-centric activity. If the people are winning, the police will win. If the people are losing, the police will also lose. So it's all about engagement, Mr. Oludu. It's all about how the people feel. And that is why I think the relationship between the police and the local community in Nigeria, needs a serious restructuring. And, if I were called to advise the Inspector General of Police, one thing I would say is that you have to work very seriously on building the trust between the communities and the police.
I think you've hit it on the nail, and I just want to play this video, which might more or less explain some of the challenges that they are facing.
This is the third squadron. It will be like
give us our logistic before we enter motor to go and die. We will go voluntarily to die because SG1 uses us for sacrifice. 2,000 people to die. We will swear for that. There is God, but we no go die.
call am for phone.
Our inconvenience allowances what they give us. Or 3 squadron no carry rifle, as especially me. I don't carry rifle. Where are you deploying me to? And I blue man carry fat book on a brick. Now player fire you. Who am I fighting with that rifle? As a mopo. So that train me. 4 people die. No endeavor, no help. And the police, fellow police gonna fuck with their wife. Bad organization. And that's true. We are dying. Come now, I interview them. Calm down. Wait, I will come. I will all the effort.
For God's sake, let us calm down.
Coordinator not they come here. Oga coordinator not they come here. We not need coordinator again. How many coordinator don't come here when we say they not? Oga we not they sick. I said no lie. No lie. No lie. No lie. We got tired. We got tired. We don't want to see the coordinator. We don't want to see him. We don't want to see him. Okay. Okay. Yes. You make sense. I withdraw my speech. I withdraw my speech. Me, I withdraw my speech.
That area of politics has gone.
Okay.
No surrender, no retreat.
No, thank you.
We remain firm.
Thank you.
I am the admin officer. I am the admin officer.
Thank you.
No surrender, no retreat.
Thank you very much.
That area of politics is gone. The first coordinator that brought us to this ground, he left. The second coordinator, he left. This time around, they bring the third one. He's trying to play politics with us. That area of politics is gone.
You are welcome,
not going
sir.
to respect them. Let our changes be done.
Okay.
Without allowance, we block this town.
Thank you.
Enough is enough.
We are here.
Enough is enough.
Thank you.
They are playing politics with people's lives. They dump us into this ground. With that armor, with that ammunition, we are to cop this very particular area within a single of a second. I know what Kandavos can do.
Good or fine?
I know what Kandavos can do.
Good to go.
How many bandits are inside this bush?
Good to go.
Playing politics. They are playing politics with people. Big men are eating money at the above there.
Saying that we should not even do
That we should not go after them. That is for me.
Okay.
This is the full information for you people.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You had it. This is not fake news, sir. These are individuals who are. You unmute yourself.
Yes, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
These are individuals in police uniform saying that their wages have not been, their allowances have not been paid. They are asked to face Boko Haram. They are asked to face bandits. The other guy said the bandit, they are telling them not to go into the bush to even go and kill the bandits, but they've not even given them their allowances, and they say enough is enough. Now, if only there's only one thing that the security summit could have done, if only they could deal with the issue of the allowances of police and recruiting police to fight this war, and they could make it strict that this guy could get their money and things, that alone can maybe resolve 50% of some of the challenges we are having. Because who is going to go and face bandit knowing full well that when he dies, the guy said they will go after his wife and start marrying his wife and going after his wife and children. These guys are human beings. What do you have to say to this?
I think you're very correct. I think what one needs to really understand, Mr. Olodo, is that these are some of the after effects of the military regime, which happened successfully in Nigeria. And at the time of the military regime, the Nigerian police was relegated to the background. And since then, even with the coming of democratic system of governance, civilian rule, we haven't seen the police has not recovered. In Nigeria and in most African countries where military regimes have been in place, the army is like, the only toolbox, the only tool that you have in your toolbox. So it's almost like, as they say, if the army is the hammer, then every problem in Nigeria is meant to look like a nail. So, there is a huge focus of the Nigerian government on looking after the welfare of the Nigerian military. But that same focus is not there for the Nigerian police. Now, even where resources are provided to the Nigerian police, because they are seen as kind of a second class, when indeed they have to be the forefront, the law enforcement, the people that have to be the forefront, the frontliners of Nigerian security. They are not. Their role is still being undermined by the Nigerian military. And it is not because the Nigerian military is doing that deliberately. It is because the Nigerian police just believes that, it's naturally complex in terms of how it manages itself with the Nigerian army. So I think there has to be that waking up and realization that times have changed. We're no longer in the military era where the army has to be the sole custodian of peace and security. And we saw this with the protest that happened alongside the EndSARS movement, where the Nigerian police was literally on its knees. And then you still had situations where the Nigerian army had to be called in. So Nigeria has to really balance that. And how can they do that? They've got to be able to do that through I don't know, I'm not going to call it a restructuring, but I think, the police has to be reformed. People have talked about reformation of the police. They've talked about, trying to rebuild the image of the Nigerian police, but that hasn't happened. That is why you can see the MOPOL, which is the mobile police, some of the other security, the local security outfits, they are talking about issues of welfare. The recruitment process has to be revived. They've got to be able to understand and select the people that really want to be service to the community. People that want to serve, not people that join the police because it's a way of, making money or a way of living the streets. That recruitment process has to be looked into. The welfare of the police, they're talking about their allowances because, if they can't afford, then there is no way that they can do their jobs because they don't have the resources to be able to do their jobs. The training of the police has to be revived. The leadership of the Nigerian police, needs to be revived. Now, look at the way that Nigerians see the police. A normal Nigerian, let me use the word normal, or a typical Nigerian sees the police as, to use the phrase, useless. They don't respect the police. They don't give the police the respect that the police deserve. But even the police themselves, that's how they see themselves. They don't see themselves differently. they don't have respect for themselves. They don't have respect for the people. So if you don't trust the people and the people don't trust you, then you can't police the people. So when you see all these videos and images of these very sad expressions of frustration, lack of allowances, lack of leadership, welfare, it tells you all you need to know. Now, for the past year, I think what has been happening with the Nigerian police is that the Nigerian police has been working towards defending itself rather than defending the population. People don't rely on the police anymore. Nobody is going to tell you that if there's a problem, I'm going to call the police, because the police itself needs to call the police because they themselves are in trouble. They are being attacked, they are being killed. I mean, at one point, the Inspector General of Police had to make it clear that the police should shoot when they feel threatened. So it tells you that there is no longer law enforcement. Everybody is now a citizen, including the police, and the only people that people are concerned with now is the criminals. So just like a local citizen who want to protect themselves, somebody in uniform is also protecting themselves the same. And you cannot run a state without the police. And I think that has to be very clear. Over to you, Mr. Olodu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I just have to thank our viewers who are watching us live right now. I can see views from Italy. I can see views from Gambia. I can see views from Scotland. I can see people watching us from New York. Thank you so much. I hope Australia will join us in the next 5 minutes as we run down. India. Like this page, share this page. Tell us where you're watching from. Dubai. I can see people watching us, and you're watching us on Facebook. You're watching us on LinkedIn. You're watching us on YouTube. That is really good. I've got with me the visiting professor, David Otto, who has experiences of counter-terrorism, de-radicalization, violence extremism, and organized crime, and he understands what is happening. Let me play another video quickly because we are in like 5 minutes to the end of what we're doing here. And I just want to show you what is happening, in other parts of Africa. And I just want you to see what is happening in other parts of Africa. That's lawlessness at another level. And yes, that is South Africa. I know you might want to say one or two things in 30 seconds. What's your view about what is going on in South Africa, and what will be your advice to other Africans that might be caught up in that place, and what will you be saying about what's happening and your advice to the government over there? Very sad.
Yes, I think, just to make a bit of correction there, because one of the first video that was shown to be in Auckland. Yes, it's been on some of the South African platforms that the Mercedes dealer was being vandalized, but in actual fact, a South African, I think one of the South African handles mistook that video. I mean, it was actually done in 2020. That was the video that happened in Oakland, in California, during the George Floyd killing of George Floyd. Yeah, so that first video was, let's just correct that. But the second one, of course, is as you rightly said, it reminds us of what happened during the EndSARS in Nigeria, but specifically this is happening in South Africa. Where there has been these riots going on, those who support the former president Jacob Zuma are saying that he's been, imprisoned for contempt of court, and that this is down to racism by white South Africans who are still bringing in the apartheid period. So it's one of those very sentimental riots that is going on in the country, specifically in the KwaZulu-Natal. So it's raised a lot of issues regarding the divide between the black South Africans and the white South Africans. It's raised a lot of issues on what is the way forward with South Africa. But again, it brings me to a very critical point, Mr. Olodu. If you look at South Africa and you look at Ethiopia, where you've got the crisis that is taking place in the northern part of Tigray region, and you look at Nigeria, but also in the eastern part of Africa where you have Mozambique. Now, what that says to you is that the most powerful nations in Africa somehow are in turmoil. Why is that the case? Why is it that the countries where we think these are the backbones of Africa, all of a sudden you have issues of insecurity happening in all these countries? I think it's because countries have to understand that the enemy is not necessarily within, but in order for you to eliminate your enemies from within and also your enemies from outside, you have to have your national intelligence estimate right. You've got to have a very comprehensive security plan to ensure that your country is not being destabilized by adverse forces outside the continent. Africa is a very powerful continent, Mr. Olodu, as we all know. In terms of resources, human and both material resources, there is no reason why we should have all these issues of insecurity. We've got the knowledge to deal with these issues. So I think our governments really need to wake up. Now, what is happening in South Africa is really devastating. The destruction there, again, as I said, it reminds me of what happened in Nigeria with the EndSARS, how much destruction was caused. Look at what is happening in South Africa. So Africa needs to wake up and understand that insecurity does not attract economic development. It doesn't attract some kind of investment, but it attracts further exploitation of natural resources. Because once you have insecurity in your country, you are ready to give out anything to bring back normality, and anything could be your natural resources. It could be anything that is valuable to the continent. So I hope that South Africa deals with this issue, just like Nigeria, just like what is happening in Mozambique and what is happening in Ethiopia, in Cameroon, and all other countries. Over to you, Mr. Olodu.
Okay, let me thank you so much. And this is our last video of the day. I'm just going to I want to share this video, the last one, just to be able to show
Anambra State. This is terrible. It's a terrible situation. All the whole occupants of these two vehicles, a Toyota Tundra and the Lexus Black, all the whole occupants killed with a rapid gunshot. Honestly, all the police escorts, all the whole people occupied, all the occupants of this vehicle has been killed, and the guys drove down to Idani Junction. Nobody knows their destination. Maybe unknown gunmen, or they are looking for these guys. Whatever may be the case, this is a terrible situation. Look at the whole men's lying on the floor. Some are even on top of fire burning them. Some are on the floor. Men are trying to see if they can rescue them, but I think there is no way. They cannot rescue anybody because the fire is much. Like all the whole cars. Look at this policeman inside the gutter. It's a terrible situation, honestly, this evening, happening in Abatete, Anambra State, by a cargo roundabout. It's terrible. A rapid gunshot, not even a slow shot, a rapid gunshot. Terrible. Wow.
That happened within the last, it happened, and this is what is happening. In the last 2 weeks now, there seems to be an increase in assassinations,
Yeah.
unlike it used to happen before. And most of the people that are being assassinated now, most of them are having police escorts. That's interesting. So now, even with your police escort, your two orderlies, you are not safe in Nigeria. So even if you buy escort, they're telling us now that even if you manage to get police escort, you can be ambushed, you can be killed and burned. And we don't know who. I don't have much information about who was in that vehicle, but I know that news is already out there in the public domain. But in the last 2 weeks, there's been an increase in assassination. If you are going to advise anybody that is a VIP in Nigeria, even with their police escort, what would be your advice to them? Because I think it look as if me and you as some people might have to put a Zoom event together on, high profile security protection for people. Because even with their police officers now, they are being killed. So we might have to explain to them about journey security, but go away with it 30 seconds. And then we'll
thank you very much. I think the incident, as you rightly said, it happened in Anambra State, in the southern part of the country, in Nigeria, of course. I think that is one of the chairman of Udala FC, which is a football club.
Yeah.
He was amongst the victims and alongside some police officers. So it was an assassination, and then they were set alight, which is arson as well as assassination. Yes, it's been happening throughout the country, and we've seen a number of high-profile individuals being targeted and assassinated. Most often, they will be targeted either in their homes or on their way out of their, perhaps going to work. And so normally, the first advice in terms of to this very important personality, whether you're a VIP or you're not a VIP, one of the things that you've got to understand is to know your environment, and to always be consistently inconsistent in terms of the way that you carry out your activities. The first point that you need to know is that you're most often going to be targeted by assassins out of routine. So they would always study your routine. They would know where you live, where you go to work, and maybe where you go to, your local mosque or your local church. These are the areas, or your local supermarket. These are the areas where human beings will always go to the same places at specific times. So I think understanding your pattern, making sure that you don't go to the same areas all the time at the same time, it's very important. There is no golden bullet on preventing these kind of assassinations, but you can mitigate them by making sure that you don't become an easy target. Even if you're a target, it becomes very difficult for somebody to target you. Having a police officer or an orderly is not a solution, because what most suspects do is they will study your defense mechanism. They will know how much force that you have, whether you can fight back, what kind of weapons that your security guys carry, and they will be able to do better in terms of how they carry out the attack. So it's not how much security you have. Is they would always find the weakest link and make sure that you're targeted through that point. So I think the general advice is to understand that you can always be a target at any time, and to avoid being very predictable in terms of where you go, because the only way that thieves or assassins can get to you is by understanding your routine. They would understand your routine, but I think the state needs to do something about this. These assassinations have a reason. There's a reason why people are targeted, and you've got to really understand who your enemies are, and to take necessary measures to deal with that. Now, the way that we advise people is to talk to them specifically and know what their specific daily routines are. We don't give general advice because it doesn't work on specific individuals.
Yeah.
So in these scenarios, even though you can have a discussion to talk about general issues, what normally helps is to talk to individuals and understand their very respective dynamics. Over to you, Mr. Olodu.
Thank you so much. And like you rightly said, what's the use of having an orderly that is only carrying one magazine, and you have these guys that are using rapid gun, as you had a rapid gun, no backup, no plans, no forensic. That's one of the challenges, is that assassination cannot be traced, because if the only way you could trace it is if you have an argument with somebody publicly, and that person says, "Oh, I'm going to kill you," and then they could go back and trace the movement of that person. Nowadays, those politicians are like, okay, he wants to get to that post, or he wants that thing, or he collected money from us. We know where to get him. Let's assassinate him. Because at the end of the day, the investigation will end with no, with no solution, because there's no forensic taking. Everything is being burnt there. There's no fire brigade. That thing was burning for more than 5 minutes. We didn't hear of fire brigade. We didn't hear of police coming. We didn't hear. And it's ordinary individuals taking pictures.
No, but it's also true. It's also important to note that investigations are only good for law enforcement. They are not good for the victim.
Yeah.
There are two types of advice that you give, to these scenarios. One, to law enforcement in terms of how to carry out the investigation, which is entirely separate from protection of VIPs.
Yeah.
Now, what a VIP needs to know is how not to get into that position whereby, they are being targeted in the first place. Now, once they've been targeted, that's over for the VIP. You are dead. You won't know whether there's an investigation going on or not. That's the end of story. So there are two levels that, of course, you know that very well, Mr. Olodu, that we always engage in. One is getting people to have that prevention psychology on how to prevent yourself from getting into that situation in the first place.
Yeah.
There are different ways of doing that, but again, it comes down to specific individual dynamics.
Yeah.
The second one is to give people confidence by letting law enforcement know how to carry out this investigation, how to respond to this kind of incidents. Maybe you can save some lives, you can save some body. I mean, it's but there are different levels, and I hope that with time we can have time to discuss this in further details.
You're spot on. We must find a way to help these people, because there are different ways in which you can save people. The gentleman was talking about a policeman that is in the gutter, that has been killed and is in the gutter. That's a loss to the family of that individual, and only God knows how much he was paid for him to even be, in the company of that VIP, And now all VIPs now in Nigeria are using 2-3 police cars, and they are targets because people could see that they are VIPs. And even now, it's even easier for a kidnapper to go after VIP and disarm their people and take them, because they will get more money from a VIP. I have to thank you so much, Mr. Professor David Otto, visiting professor. Thank you so much for honoring us with your time. And for those that are watching us right now, watching us in Lagos, in Abuja, watching us in Spain, we thank you. Those watching us in Gambia, thank you so much. We're doing it same time on Saturday, 5 p.m. Do not change your dial. Keep watching us, and thank you so much, Professor David Otto, for giving us your time. And until we meet again, guys, let me leave you with this narrative video that talks about how best to deal with the issue of Boko Haram in Nigeria, because that's the way it should be done properly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sahara Productions.
Though they use Allah, want to buy the key people. Allah is crazy, oh, they keep person. Boko Haram them they